It's the 2022 World Cup. It's Portugal's players. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin, and today we'll be looking at Portugal's squad for the 2022 World Cup. Short version, please. Brings us to the end of our player-by-player discussion, and we move on to a discussion of the squad. Before we do that, I should talk about my shirt. You may have noticed, the YouTube watchers, that it's not quite a Portugal shirt. And once again, I confess to the poverty of my shirts, but I have at least tried to color match, as I have to do with so many teams. That's as good as I can do. But I promise to work on my shirt collection after this World Cup. And hey, maybe some Portuguese fan could, kind of throw a shirt my way. Maybe one that a player wore on the field. Okay, I'll move on. Let's talk about a few notes. So we'll kind of go back to the notes that we had at the top of the podcast in the takeaways section, takeaways from our previous podcast. So I won't repeat the stuff that's kind of focused on the team. Just briefly, I'll say we talked about the what and the how. And what we meant by that was the what is their results in tournament, which are quite good. But the how is a bit less convincing because they tend to not win group stages or group qualification stages and have a few kind of shudders along the way. So not as convincing in qualification or in a close analysis as they are, or they seem to be in a kind of a superficial overview of their final results. Finally, we also pointed out that the two friendlies they played against Qatar were experimental, but we also noted that maybe it was the start of our third point, moving to a rotation system. So as we've seen with actually many teams in the previews to these cups, the previews to these teams in the cup, there seems to be a bit of a trend going on with teams using a rotation system of two players in several positions, rather than the traditional format of having kind of a starter and a backup. So we saw this very clearly in a couple of positions for Portugal, where it used to be a starter and a backup, and now seems to be an alternating position between two players. So that makes it a bit difficult to predict starters, and we've had to start using a different color coding of yellow to denote players who, they're not the clear starter, but they will probably get some starts. And we also use yellow for two players that seem to alternate starts. So rotation, kind of a thing in this 2022 World Cup. The other point we want to talk about was is this the end of a generation? We have seen, and we will see more clearly shortly, that a lot of the players in this generation are getting older. Around the turn of the century, Portugal's performance record picked up with what was called the golden generation, kind of led by Luis Figo. And that took them from a team who often didn't qualify for cups to a team that regularly qualified and actually regularly passed the group stage. So sometimes among the top teams in Europe. And we also noted that they had done well to replace that generation in what I call the Cristiano Ronaldo generation. And they remained at that high standard of reaching cups and passing group stages for the most part. Now that generation, the Ronaldo generation, is coming to an end. And it's not just him, but a few players alongside of him, which we'll talk about soon. And the question is, are they aging out? Does this mean Portugal will go back to being a fairly, second tier, let's say, team? in Europe? Or are they producing enough players that they can kind of keep this going and maybe even argue to becoming kind of permanently a top team in Europe? Well, we will see that they've done better than most. We have a few teams in this World Cup who, after the World Cup, we're a bit worried about because we know there's going to be a swath of their star players retiring. But when we look at club affiliations below, we'll see that Portugal was and continues to be regenerating quite nicely. And we'll leave it at that for now and move on to club affiliations. So this kind of demonstrates the point because their club affiliations are quite impressive. So we've seen a lot of players with Paris Saint-Germain, Nuno Mendes and Danilo, and other players who have been there in the past. Vitinha, who is just a possible candidate here, and Renato Sanchez also with Paris Saint-Germain and other top teams in England, for example, a couple of Manchester City players. We have Barcelona, I thought we had represented, Atletico Madrid, and then I should mention a couple, and of course top teams in Portugal too, Porto, Benfica, and Sporting Lisbon too. We have Borussia Dortmund in Germany also, and Italian teams. AC Milan in Italia, in Italy, Rafael Leao with AC Milan. And we've had, if there's not a lot of players now in Italy, there are players who have played for top clubs there before. Rui Patricio's with Roma. But interestingly, in addition to some top clubs in England like Manchester City and Man United, we also kind of have a gathering of Portuguese at Wolverhampton in England. So currently, I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 players. 6 players with Wolverhampton right now, and there's also players like Rui Patricio who have played with them in the past. One of them even with Wolverhampton's youth club. So kind of a little Portugal there in England, a gathering place. So impressive club affiliations for Portugal suggest that they are doing a good job renewing. Let's talk a little bit about some statistics. So I have been working on a few statistics. Excuse me, I just have to take a drink. Okay, sorry about that. The first statistics we look at is how many players they have on the slate. And Portugal has 42 players who have played for the team since 2021. And that compares with an average of 49. So Portugal dealing with a smaller group of players to select from. But as we've seen, it's a pretty impressive group of players. And even the way it is, they'll probably have to cut some players that many teams would bring to the cup. We've seen that some of their players with top clubs, even Ruben Diaz with Manchester City, despite that good club affiliation, has difficulty getting onto the club as a starter, at least onto Portugal. So they're very rich in terms of players, despite having less than average in their total pool of players. And then as far as the serious candidates, those that we coded as definite, likely, or possible, it's 35. The average is 33, so not really much to talk about there. It's pretty average number. And the number of definite or likely candidates is 23. Which is slightly higher than the average of 21.5, suggesting that they've pretty much chosen their squad. We've pretty much seen what their squad is going to be like. There may be a couple of injuries players going out. There may be a couple of players in good form coming in, but even the way it is, since they got to bring 26 players to the club, it'll probably just be 3 or 4 or so of the possible players that we talked about in the player-by-player podcast. Only 3 or 4 of them will actually make the final squad. So the squad pretty much decided for Portugal. In terms of age, they are one of the oldest squads with an average age of 27.4. And the overall average for the teams that we've done is actually quite high, 26.9. So the players in this World Cup, I think, a bit older on average than previous World Cup. But Portugal still one of the oldest among them. And part of the reason for that is they have some very senior players. Pepe is 39 years old, Jose Fonte 38, Cristiano Ronaldo 37, and João Moutinho 36. Most squads only have maybe one player of that age, if they have any at all. But Portugal has those 4 players. However, overall, they only have 7 players who are 30 or above. So most of their players are in their mid to late 20s. And if we go to the bottom of the scale, we have 8 players who are 23 or younger. So that kind of balances out the scale a little bit, but tends to be on the older side. And not a bad thing at all, because it gives them great experience. Their average number of caps among these players is 40.2, and that is extremely high, maybe the highest among all teams. Belgium has more caps per player, but only Belgium is higher. And Qatar is higher. The average anyway is 29.9. So they're 25% higher than other teams. So a very experienced squad. Also a squad that has a lot of goals amongst them. And this one really is by far the highest. 220 goals among these players. The average is 131. And in terms of goals per cap, total goals per player, it's not per player, it's per cap. So I've come up with this statistic that just kind of measures this, and they are 16.2%. The average is 13.6%, so they're significantly higher, and one of the highest. So I'll just tell you, Argentina and Germany are both 17.5%, and then the next team is France with 16.8%, and you'll never guess who is 4th. I'll give you a moment to think about it. Poland, not a team I really think of as a high-scoring team, but they're 4th, and Portugal is just behind them. So no problem for Portugal getting goals, and they get them all over the field as well. So I'll just go over some stats for goals before we move on, and that is Cristiano Ronaldo with a staggering 61%. That means he scores a goal every 2 out of 3 games, and I would dare say there's very few players, if any, at that ratio. They also have Andre Silva at 37% and Diogo Jota at 34%. Those are really good numbers. Defender Diego Dallo is 33%, but it's 2 goals in 6 games. So we don't really take the number seriously unless they have more than 20 games under their belt. Goncalo Guedes has 7 goals in 32 games. That's pretty respectable at 22%. And then several players in the high teens. So overall, a good scoring team, Portugal, and players from all over the field putting the ball in the net for them. All right, next we're going to move on to players and issues to watch. Starting in the defense with the goalkeeper position. So Patricio Rui and Diogo Costa This is one of several pairings where we see a move from a kind of starter with a backup to a rotation system in the Nations League game. So initially it was kind of Patricio Rui, and then the secondary keeper who would only get on if Rui was injured or something like that. Now in the Nations League games in June, we saw them kind of rotating. So each of them played two games. Will that be the way it is in the Cup too? And as mentioned, there's several positions where that's the case. The next issue, though, is there room for Ruben Diaz? So in central defense, we have Pepe, and we have the defensive midfielder Danilo kind of drafted in, and that's the central pairing. But Ruben Diaz plays for Manchester City. Hard to believe that a player of a club of that stature is kind of being a substitute. So will the Manchester City player get a sniff of starting? In the right defense, we have Rafael Guerrero. Sorry, left defense, Rafael Guerrero and Nuno Mendes. Kind of a similar situation of starter and backup switching to a rotation. So I'm expecting both of those to get at least one start. On the right side, though, João Cancelo seems, by contrast, to be the definite starter there. Ultimately replacing Nelson Semedo, who predominated in the Cup, although that might have been because João Cancelo was injured. Was out with coronavirus for the Cup. In the midfield, one of the considerations is the formation changes. So the formation changes makes it a bit hard to pin down the midfield position. The 4-3-3 formation seems to have emerged as the favored formation, but that makes it a bewildering number of candidates rotating through those three midfielder positions. So a nice problem to have. In a sense, it's a problem of having too much talent, too many good players to fill just three positions. So I wonder what they're going to do in the Cup with all that talent. On the attack, a similar situation with Diogo Jota and Rafael Leao as left attacker. Is one of them going to be a starter, or are they going to rotate as they did towards the end of the period we're talking about in the June Nations League games? On the right, similarly, is it Goncalo Guedes or Otavio? It looked like Goncalo Guedes was the main player, but then Otavio came in and played all the Nations League games. So is it going to be one or the other, or a rotation of both? And even up top, with Ronaldo and Andre Silva, Ronaldo was certainly the starter in the Cup, but as the period wore on, Silva increasingly rotated in, and by the time Nations League came around, it was 2 games for each of them there as well. Let's move on to some new players that have joined the club, joined the national team. And I'm going to limit the discussion here to players that we coded as definite or likely, because otherwise it becomes a bit unwieldy. But a new player, Diogo Costa, in goal, seems to have become the backup keeper, if not a rotating starter. And he's just 23 years old, plays for Porto in Spain. And even though he joined the team in 2021, seems to have moved into, become kind of a key player there. We have central midfielder Matthias Nunes. So he only started 2 of their 10 games, but we consider him likely because he was subbed in for 6 besides. He plays for Wolverhampton in England, as do so many of the Portuguese players. And he is 24 years old, never played in a tournament. Rafael Leao, we just looked at him as a left winger, possibly a starter, maybe a rotating starter. He's just 23 years old and plays for AC Milan in Italy, so a pretty good club affiliation there. He has been with Portugal since 2021, but already has 11 caps. So it looks like he's making good inroads into the teams. Unlike actually some other teams where a lot of the new players are kind of just at the possible level and haven't been used that much, but these players have really made inroads into the team. Finally, we have right midfielder Otavio. So he started 6 of their remaining 13 games after his first one in September 2021. He's not as young as the others, 27 years old, but he did get his first cap in 2021. And he, like Diogo Costa, the goalkeeper at the top, plays for Porto in Portugal. Let's look at some of the injuries. So Nelson Semedo was injured for the June matches, but as we noted in the Player-by-Player podcast, is back playing with his club by August 2022. So not really an issue there. And we also have Diogo Jota, who looked like he would be was a bit touch and go at the beginning of the season. He was out with a hamstring injury in August, but he came back in early September, and he seems okay now. And finally, we have João Felix. And João Felix was a possible candidate, out with a muscle injury for the June games, but was back in action with his squad in September. So really no injuries to worry about so far. And among these players, only one of them, Diogo Jota, is at the likely level or higher. So one gets the feeling they could afford to lose Nelson Semedo and João Felix without too much damage to the team. Finally, let's look at notable absences. So we have goalkeeper Anthony Lopez. Never really was a starter or anything like that, but he was a backup keeper in Euro 2016 and 20, and also in the World Cup 2018, but now seems to have made way for other players like Diogo Jota, who we just saw. Rafa Silva, kind of an interesting absence there. He looked like the 28-year-old was continuing with the team, having played in the 2020 Euro Cup. And after he last appeared on the bench shortly after the Euro Cup in September 2021, I sense, he wasn't called up after that, and in September 22, announced his retirement from the team for personal reasons. So still has a couple of years left in him, but has announced his retirement, so is not a consideration for this cup. Bruno Alves is a central defender. He last appeared in the 2018 World Cup. He was just on the roster there. His prime years were around the 2010 and 2014 World Cup, but he hung up his boots for the national team after the 2018. I don't know if he announced his retirement, but his last appearance was in that World Cup, and he hung up his boots in 2022 as a club player also. Ricardo Quaresma, also missing. He was off the team by the time the Euro 2021 came around. He was just a sub in the 2018 World Cup and never much more than a substitute, but he did have 80 caps for the national team, and was at least on the bench for the 2018 World Cup. So a familiar name that we won't see at the World Cup. And that's it for notable absences. So we'll finish the podcast with the players who we predict are going to start. And we start with Fernando Santos. So he's been their manager since 2016. And it would be a bit late to get rid of him now. So we're going to call him a starter, the starting manager. Maybe I'll name the definite, unlikely, and any significant possible candidates before for our podcast listeners before talking about the starters. So for goalkeeper as a definite, we have Rio Patricio and Diogo Costa, both definite, and possible Jose Sa and Rui Silva. So probably one of those two making the third string keeper. And in this case, if there is to be a starter, I would say it's Patricio Rui. But I really think it's going to be a rotation with Diogo Costa, maybe not starting as much, but I think he will get a start in the Cup, even if it's more than a kind of a B team game there. For central defenders, Pepe and Danilo Pereira have been a kind of a steady pairing, kind of leaving Ruben Diaz a bit on the outside. So Pepe and Danilo are definite candidates. Ruben Diaz is a likely candidate. And we have 4 possible candidates: Domingos Duarte, Jose Fonte, Thiago Giallo, and David Carmo. I would imagine maybe one of them. Usually they bring about 5 central defenders to the Cup. But it seems like Ruben Diaz is going to be kind of a substitute unless someone gets injured, and maybe 2 of the possible candidates there. But again, Danilo Pereira is actually coded as a midfielder. Left back, we have Nuno Mendes as a definite and Rafael Guerreiro as a likely, and I kind of think they're going to be rotating. Guerreiro has kind of been in the position primarily, but Nuno Mendes has made inroads, and there's not enough evidence to suggest which one would be a starter. Not so on the right side, though. Right back, João Cancelo was out with coronavirus for Euro 2020, but is back now and seems to have a firm hold on the right back position. The likely candidate is Diogo Dalot, and kind of the outgoing candidate is Nelson Semedo. So we think it's possible he makes the squad, but maybe not. But João Cancelo with Diogo Dalot kind of in a backup role there on the bench. In the midfield, they generally went with a 4-3-3 formation, but they did use a couple of other formations and won't necessarily stick to that. But generally, it is one central defender. It's very hard to tell, though, because it could be any one of a number of players. So perhaps better if we do all of these players together. So defensive midfielders, we have Ruben Neves and João Palhinha as likely to make it on the squad. Central midfielders, we have William Carvalho and Matheus Nunes as likely candidates, with Renato Sanchez and Vitinha as possible candidates. I can't really see, I wouldn't be surprised if one of them started, but I don't see anyone jumping out at me as a starter. So it could be any one of them, or maybe a bit of a combination, or maybe none at all, because another confusing thing about the midfielders, they move around quite a bit. So we created a category of versatile midfielders for those who move around a lot. And for definite candidate, we have Bruno Fernandes and Bernardo Silva, and as a likely candidate, João Moutinho. I think actually Bruno Fernandes and Bernardo Silva will start without necessarily predicting where they'll start. It could be anywhere. And I think João Moutinho has a good chance of starting also. But I'm going to put him as a yellow in that he will start some games, not necessarily all of them. But I'm not even willing to put yellow on any of the defensive or central midfielders, because I just can't tell which it'll be. So let's move on. Left midfielders and right midfielders will probably be a selection of these defensive, central, and versatile midfielders that we've talked about. On the left wing, I think Diogo Jota and Rafael Leao will share starts. So I don't see anyone as a single starter. And on the right wing, but Diogo Jota and Rafael Leao really sharing starts as left attacking midfielders, left wingers, or left forwards, depending on the formation they use. But I think they will rotate basically in that upper left quadrant of the field. The next candidates I see as possible starters are in the attacking midfielder role. And again, I think if we go back to the versatile midfielders, Bruno Fernandes and Bernardo Silva, I think they're more likely to play central attacking midfielder. And I don't see any of the candidates we have listed here as starters. However, on the right attacking midfield side, I think it's going to be like the left, with likely candidates Goncalo Guedes and Otavio sharing the starting role. So I can't pick out a definite starter there. Maybe Otavio has the edge, having started all the Nations League games in June. João Felix, a possible secondary striker, would be more of a substitute. And forwards, we only have two definite candidates, Cristiano Ronaldo and Andre Silva. Andre Silva has been coming more and more into it, not necessarily playing as a centre forward, but perhaps part of a two-forward line with Cristiano Ronaldo, or we've seen both of them kind of playing as the left attacking midfielder. So I'm going to say for Cristiano Ronaldo, put him in as a definite starter. And Andre Silva, I'm tempted to do the same, but just to be cautious, I'll put him as a sometimes starter. Okay, well, I'm sure there will be a few surprises when the starting lineups come out, so I don't do that with any supreme confidence, but that is kind of a glance. And we'll update that in the podcast, in the update podcast. So that brings us to the end of this podcast. And I'll just make the picture a bit smaller for our YouTube viewers. And keep in mind, we will be doing that update podcast and including new information that comes out, the September games, any friendlies we play, and the preliminary and final rosters. So we'll probably do the podcast after the final rosters are released. Meanwhile, keep an eye on us at Soccerphiles Canada. That's Soccerphiles with a PH in the middle and an S at the end. And our website, soccerphiles.captivate.fm. And check the show notes, which I've been working on, with lots of notes and links to help guide you through the series that we've done. Thanks for listening, and hope to see you again in our next MediaCast. Bye-bye.